Hello, everybody, and welcome to And Yet We Believe. We're glad you're here. This is episode number 27. We've titled this, How Patriarchy in the Church Hurts Men. This is going to be a really good one. So welcome, whether you're joining us live on Instagram as we record this, or later on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you pod your casts. Welcome, we're glad to have you.
All right. So let's jump in. So the reason that we wanted to talk about this, this topic actually came from me. I chose this one. And it came because one of my guilty pleasures is that I watch shows about polygamy.
Sounds like a pleasure.
Here it is. A lot of them are filmed in Utah, and I just like to see, what's shown in Utah.
Yep, there you go.
But I was watching an episode of a show about polygamy, and it's about these girls that left one of the polygamous groups here in Utah, and they tried to help other women escape. And they were helping one of their mothers escape, and the mom wanted to escape because she had a 14-year-old daughter that was starting to get courted by her uncle, or, it was some 40-year-old man that was going to start courting this 14-year-old girl. And she really wanted her daughter to get out of polygamy before she got married and before it was, too far. And so they start moving this family out, and in the process, you see, it doesn't even come up anywhere, but you see that she's also moving 3 young boys with her. So she has a 14-year-old daughter and then 3 boys that were younger. And I thought, why, I get why the daughter is getting out, why they want to save this daughter. But why are they not talking about the boys and the harm that this religion and also patriarchy does to these boys? Because they talk all the time about the dad that, has 27 wives or whatever and 300 kids. And they talk about how domineering he is and how abusive he is physically, mentally, all of the things. They talk about all of this from the dad, but they never talk about how these boys are growing up in a system that demeans women and treats them horribly, and, it has clear issues. And so I wanted to bring up this topic of how patriarchy hurts men, because I don't know that it even is on their radar. It never comes up. There are a few boys that are kicked out because they are getting in the way of the older men continuing to marry, and so they kick some of the young boys out. But the whole point of this is, let's talk about how men and boys are harmed from patriarchy. So clearly this is going to be in his
this one's on me
all day. So let's jump in.
This is close to home for both of us. We have 4 boys. Mm-hmm. We don't have any daughters. We have 4 boys. And so we do think about these things, and this is something that's really important to us.
Yeah.
So maybe we start with, just so we're all on the same page, a definition of patriarchy, just so we can kind of settle that.
Yeah.
I have one. I think you have one.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
Okay. So the one that I have is just kind of a quick little thing, but patriarchy does not equal men. Patriarchy is a system, a story, a set of rules and expectations of what it means to be a, quote, real man. And there's a little more to that, but I think that that's really important to set that groundwork, that we're not hating men. Patriarchy is a system that men and women are harmed by and play into.
Right.
So
the definition I have is a little more clinical.
Okay.
It is any setup, patriarchy is any setup in which men hold the majority of the power and dominate in leadership, authority, and decision-making.
Okay.
So, and we're talking specifically about patriarchy in the church, but the things that we'll talk about a kind of bridge between a larger societal patriarchy and patriarchy in the church. Mm-hmm. Some people have a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction to talking about patriarchy, especially in the church.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to address that, because when we talk about patriarchy in the church, this is not a judgment. This is not being necessarily critical of the church. I think we can view this a little bit objectively and just make observations without judging and say, is the church a setup where men hold the majority of the power? Yeah. I think that's pretty clear.
And it's, the church was created in a time when patriarchy was totally rampant.
For sure.
Still is. But patriarchy is not, obviously, it's not exclusive to our church or anything. It's been around as long as there have been humans, basically. And so patriarchy is an old system that continues to go. And unfortunately, our church, it was started in that time period, and they didn't do anything. I mean, they tried a few things here and there to maybe get away from patriarchy a tiny bit, but for the most part, they have not done anything to stem or keep at bay any patriarchal issues.
So when we talk about patriarchy affecting men, patriarchy hurting men, there's a couple of themes that we'll keep coming back to, and we'll expound on a lot of this, but just to give a summary up front, patriarchy compels men to conform to a narrow definition of masculinity. And going along with that, it does not allow men to be afraid or sad or vulnerable, even when those are normal human things that everybody feels and everybody should feel to be a whole and complete person. So that's a starting point here.
Yeah, I have a really good quote that kind of goes along with that. This is from a therapist, Chris Hoff, that I found online. He says, patriarchy tells men that their worth comes from power, dominance, and control, that showing vulnerability makes them weak, that they must be providers, protectors, winners. And when they fall short or when they question these ideals, whether these ideals even make sense, the result is often shame, loneliness, or rage, sometimes all three. So, yeah, I think that especially the emotions part of stunting the emotions and the ability for emotions to grow and be expressed and be felt and all of that, I think that is really, really one of the biggest harms that comes from this.
Yep. As a man, I agree.
Stamp of approval.
This is where I get to weigh in with my own personal experience. So, everybody's experience is different growing up, but there are masculine themes of, you need to man up. There's no crying in baseball. I don't know if this is predominantly American or if this is worldwide, but this idea that as a boy, as a man, you do not have these emotions, and you do not feel sadness, and you do not feel fear, and you are not vulnerable.
And one of the only emotions that men are able to have is anger.
Right.
That
one's okay.
Yeah, that's the one that's celebrated, or that they go to when they can't feel those other things.
Yep. So I have a quote from Bell Hooks, who is great. She says, "The first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves." I think this is true. I'll share an example in just a moment. But the result of a patriarchal suppression of emotions in young men and then adult men is unprocessed trauma and anxiety. If you're not allowed to have those feelings, they don't just go away.
Yeah.
Now, I was very much one of these people who suppressed emotions, did not feel like it was appropriate or good to be expressing sadness or God forbid to cry, especially in front of other people. The word stoic was used to describe me for a good portion of my life, to the extent that when Anne and I started dating, I knew one of her roommates pretty well, and her roommate warned her and said, he is not going to be emotionally available. That is not what he does.
Communication is not there.
He's going to be married to his work. That's all there is. Hopefully that has not actually turned out that way.
I saw through that. I saw what was underneath all of that.
Yeah. So,
because you were that for a little bit.
I was, absolutely.
That is something that you are trying to break out of.
Yeah.
So there was truth to her comment, but there was more to it than just that.
Yep. And so I talked about unprocessed trauma and anxiety, and maybe trauma is not the right word, maybe anxiety is. But to get super personal on this without sharing all the details, I was not aware that I was storing up and building up unprocessed anxiety until it kind of exploded and turned into some real mental health challenges that I've had as an adult. This is a real thing. And this is really tangible to me because I've been able to see in my own life, I suppressed these things for a long time, and then I got to see exactly how they came home to roost when I was in my 40s. Mm-hmm. That this became a real thing for me.
Yeah. I have heard that, obviously we're talking about men suppressing emotions, and I think a lot of men have a hard time learning about empathy and gaining empathy. Mm-hmm. I think, that starts as children where boys are given trucks and dinosaurs and superheroes and action figures where it promotes an action, it promotes fighting or, some activity. Whereas if they are given dolls promote social relationships and working through emotions and boys are not allowed to do that, Well,
let me call something out in that. You talked about the kinds of toys where there is a winner. Mm-hmm. Military, things that fight and sports.
Yeah.
And so I've got a quote from Richard Rohr on this, who has done a lot of work with men.
Yeah.
He says, men themselves have historically been victims by being put into military and business worlds where everything was framed in terms of win or lose. It kept them in the dualistic mindset much longer. The competitive paradigm became the only way that many men knew how to read reality. They thought that to be a hero meant to win. Mm-hmm. And that shows up quite a bit as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it shows up in our dad's generation and, with John Wayne and like being this tough cowboy. And I mean, that was the ideal. That was what you aspired to be, was this stoic, tough man that had no emotion, showed no emotion unless it was anger.
Yep.
Yeah, it's hard. And I did hear, just to kind of circle this around, that one of the best ways for men to learn empathy is to read fiction.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting? Because they are reading and seeing these relationships and experiences play out. And so you can start to say, oh, I resonate with this character, or I like how he or she did that. And so they learn to deal with relationships through fiction.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool.
That is cool. Okay. Yeah. So we talked about suppression of emotions. And I want to talk about something that's very tied to that, which is a lack of getting help. And we've got a comment in the chat here. Feel free, everybody, to be jumping in the chat here, everybody that's joined us live. Comment from Tom here. I think the emotions stem from the males being former hunter-gatherers and having to be in the wild and always show no emotion to protect their women and children. Over time, that grew systemic. That may be.
Yeah. That's very possible.
I can neither confirm nor deny. But that makes a ton of sense.
Rings true with what I've heard.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it's tricky because I also know that in those times of hunter-gatherers and all of that things were very communal. And, and it was a village that was raising kids and everybody worked together. And, so it's different. And yet I think that some of those things definitely came down through our genes, through epigenetics. That stuff all plays out. So
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about a lack of getting help for men. I think the first piece here is a stigma around therapy.
100%.
And a stigma around getting help at all.
Yeah. And that's true for men and women, but I do think it is very strong for men, that men do not want to go to a therapist.
Yep. I think another one here is a lack of friendships. Mm-hmm. Or even just shallow friendships that lack intimacy and vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And so I have to mention here the Brian Regan bit.
I was going to just say this.
We reference this quite a bit.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, you describe it.
Well, help me if I get it wrong, but it's a guy that goes out golfing with his buddy. Mm-hmm. The wife just had a baby not too long ago, and they, come home, and the man's wife is like, hey, how's the baby? You know, how's the wife and the baby doing? And the husband says,
didn't come up.
Because men don't go deep. They don't. Is that true? Like, you don't hang out, like, you watch football with a guy in our ward.
Yes.
Every week.
Yes.
Do you ever talk about anything other than football?
We do, because I've made an effort to do so.
Because you're learning.
But, right.
Yeah.
Because I'm on this journey. But I can say for sure that for years I said, I don't need to have friends. I have a family. I have coworkers. Mm-hmm. I think I'm good. I don't think that's real. But I will say for sure that getting therapy has been one of the best things that I've done. And one of the best possible things for my mental health that I could have done. I will not hide that. I'm proud to say that I go to a therapist and it's enormously meaningful for me. So I don't know how many men are listening. If women are listening and you want to send this to a man in your life or something, you can hear it from a man. This has been so valuable to me and so important for me on my mental health journey.
Well, and I think that one of the pitfalls of patriarchy that men struggle with is they believe that they can just think their way out of anything.
Absolutely, 100%.
You know, I'm just going to logic my way out of this pain I'm feeling or whatever. But you need help to climb out from under patriarchy. I heard today that when it comes to emotions, 80% of emotions are felt in our body and 20% are felt in our head, in our brain. And so you cannot logic your way out of emotions. You need to process them.
I would say that was the inflection point for me at which I decided I needed to see a therapist.
Interesting. Was
when I could no longer logic myself out of it.
Well, were you logicking yourself out of it before, or were you just suppressing it more?
I was, but I could do that in my head.
Yeah.
You know, and I could
get it enough that put it on the shelf enough that you didn't have to deal with
it. Exactly. And once it got to a point where I could no longer do that, that's when I needed to go get help.
Yeah, and thank goodness you realized that.
Yeah, and there are other outcomes when men don't get help. Addiction rates, substance abuse is twice as high in men as it is in women. Violent crime rates are 4 times higher in men than in women. And men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women. Partly, I would assume, because of the stigma around getting help.
Mm-hmm. That's what I've heard as well.
Yeah. I have a quote from Barbara Brown Taylor from her excellent book, Learning to Walk in the Dark. Mm-hmm. This is a tiny bit long. I thought this was so insightful, so stick with me through this quote. And she's referencing someone else, so she's quoting someone else, so it's kind of a little complicated. She says, one of the main things that tips people toward garden variety depression is a low tolerance for sadness. Okay? It is the inability to bear dark emotions that causes many of our most significant problems. In other words, and not the emotions themselves. When we cannot tolerate the dark, we try all kinds of artificial lights, including but not limited to drugs, alcohol, shopping, shallow sex, and hours in front of the television set or computer. There are no dark emotions, just unskillful ways of coping with emotions we cannot bear. Sadness does not sink a person. It is the energy a person spends trying to avoid sadness that does that. And I thought this was so insightful, and I relate to this again 100%. I love this concept that there are no dark emotions.
It may feel like you're in the dark, like you are in a struggle.
For sure.
But yeah.
For sure. But there are no bad emotions.
Yes.
I'm sure is what she's saying here,
yeah.
or who she's quoting. There are no bad emotions. If you are sad, that is okay. Mm-hmm. And if you are frustrated or even angry that we mentioned, if you're distraught, if you're in a dark place, I'm going to use that word dark again, those aren't bad emotions, and you have to feel those again to be an entire person. But it's, again, what she says, it is the energy a person spends trying to avoid these things that sinks a person.
Yeah,
I completely relate to that. All of that effort to put it on the shelf and suppress it, I think that's what got me to an inflection point.
That dug the hole even deeper each time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you for the comments that just came through. Being in that dark, it says being in that dark emotional place was one of the darkest, scariest times I've ever experienced. My husband and I have been in that depth of anxiety and helplessness. and it is extremely horrible.
Yeah,
definitely. These are hard things to talk about, and being able to process these emotions, even if it's just, right here in this podcast, being able to think about when you have suppressed things or what emotions you struggle with, and being aware, being cognizant enough that you can look at that and say, okay, what do I do with that? Maybe I do need help, or, if therapy is not the next step, maybe it is talking to a spouse or a sibling or, somebody that you can start to bring these things up with and stop hiding them.
Somebody that you can have that vulnerability with. I want to call out one more comment here about it is okay for boys to cry. I'm going to +1 that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I had to learn this as an adult. And I felt like it was some sort of failure to cry. And so, again, it wasn't the feelings I was feeling. It was the fact that I was crying about them. That was really kind of traumatic and hard for me. And so that's something that I've had to figure out.
Yeah.
So +1 on that. I had to learn that it's okay to not be okay. And that's an ongoing thing for me, because for so many years, for so many decades, it was not okay to not be okay.
Yeah. I heard somebody talk today about these millennial men that were raised with this sort of thing, this mentality of masculinity and strength and, all of that. But millennial men right now are doing the work to unpack all of that.
Yep.
And the podcaster I was listening to said, I can't wait to see the studies that come out about the children that are raised by these millennial men. It's going to be really interesting to see what shifts there are in society, because we are starting to raise children with this thought that it's okay to feel emotions. I said that to our 7-year-old yesterday. It's okay to feel sad. It's not okay to hurt people when you feel it.
Sure.
That's what I said, because he had been angry with a brother. It's okay to feel sad, but it's your, what you do with that sadness that we need to now talk about and figure out.
Yep. Okay, we've talked about some ways that patriarchy hurts men, kind of at a societal level. I want to dig in on some church-specific stuff. All those things are true for men in the church as well. But let's talk about some church-specific stuff. And I want to talk specifically about worthiness anxiety and perfectionism. And this is probably true of men and women both, but there's an emphasis in the church on worthiness from a very early age. And as a young man, you're being told from the time you're able to remember anything out of primary that it is required for you to go on a mission. And hopefully people are saying that in better ways now. I knew that it was not optional, and that it was expected of me to go on a mission, and that it was a failure if I did not go on a mission.
A failure for you and your parents, probably.
I'll get to that in a minute. I think that's a totally separate topic as parents, but the way that I was raised, and this is not a criticism of my parents, it may come from teachers at church in a variety of places, but there was a cloud hanging over me through my teenage years, up through my young adult years, because there were so many ways to fail as a young man. Getting involved with pornography, premarital sex, not going on a mission, coming home early from a mission, not getting married in the temple, all of these things, and then later providing for your family, being some sort of presiding leader in your family, whatever that means. There were all of these things, and there were so many checkpoints where I could fail. I used to have dreams that I had committed certain sins. It was kind of the same dream, except it was a different thing every time. And it was never that I was committing the sin. It was always the feeling that I had, that this was something I had done and I had messed things up. And so this was a
deep-rooted fear of everything.
Yeah.
That's so sad to hear.
Yeah. And we talked about this mentality of winning and losing. And that's the only way that I could see the world, was either you won or you lost, you succeeded or you failed. And maybe some of that's the way I'm wired. Maybe some of that's my growing up experience. But I think for those of us who grew up in this generation where the gospel was taught as a gospel of rules and retribution, this probably rings true with a lot of men.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that? You know, what can you do to change that, to start getting out from underneath that?
Right. Well, this is dualistic thinking, like Richard Rohr talked about a minute ago. This is black and white thinking. This is a stage one faith approach. And it means being able to recognize the fallacy in that. And I think that's a starting point. Also, get a good therapist. This is, can I keep saying this? But I want to bring up what you mentioned, which is the game is the same when you're a parent. Because now I'm looking at the ways that I can fail as a parent. And a lot of them are the same things. And this is not real, okay, guys? Like, you don't really fail as a parent. But hardwired in me is something that says, well, what if my son doesn't go on a mission? What if they don't get married in the temple? What if this? What if that? And this deep-rooted sense of, I think I'm failing as a parent if that's the case. It's not true.
Yeah.
And I can't emphasize strongly enough that is not true. That is not failure as a parent. Somebody else's agency does not dictate your success or failure. So. Yeah.
I mean, we have this, I think we have this fear of an impending doom. And it is not just a doom for this world, but it is an eternal doom if we don't do it right, or you know, if our kids don't make the right decisions, then we're not going to be in heaven with them. And I think that is so damaging, that teaching that that we're not going to be together, or that choices on earth will separate us in heaven. I don't believe in heavenly parents that are punitive like that.
Right.
And the way that comes through in patriarchy is really damaging. Yeah. Because it just causes a lot of, I think it causes a lot of like performance. There's performance of like, I can't do this right, so I'm not going to try. Or if I do it, you know, I don't know. I think there's like, people want to fit a mold so that they can seem like they are doing everything right, and that they are the type of man, the type of woman, you know, whatever that patriarchy that the church requires of them. And that living inauthentically is where the trouble comes.
Yeah, really, really good, sort of heartbreaking comment. Really appreciating all the comments today. Says, I think just loving everyone for every journey they are on. That's it. I love that. And a huge one for me is celebrating every missionary, even if they come home early. And then this person adds, my brother came home early and didn't get a welcome home Sunday talk or even acknowledgement. Gosh. Which is absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah, how much damage can be done to one person? That's really heartbreaking. I'm so sorry. Yeah,
I'm sure that, well, if it was me, I don't want to speak for other people. If it was me and I came home early from my mission, I'm already feeling like I've failed in some way because of how that was drilled into me. And then to have that kind of reinforced and getting home, yikes. Yeah. Don't love that. There's an inflection point in a young man's life that I think we don't talk about in the church, and I actually think it's really, really important. And it's when a boy becomes a man. No, okay. No, I do mean that, but in a very specific way, which is, for me, it was when we got married. I think that's a pretty natural place, but it's where you stop being part of your old family and start being part of your new family, right? Okay? Because what this means for a man in the church is, okay, all of a sudden I'm supposed to preside here. And you've gone, the power dynamic has flipped. You've gone from being, subservient's the wrong word, but being underneath your father. Right. To now being
in charge of everything.
I have this vague idea that I'm supposed to be in charge of something, and I don't know what it means, and I've never been taught what preside means, and I'm anchoring on that word on purpose because it's just so laden with baggage. Yeah. But I think a lot of men, and we don't talk about this, we don't articulate this, get to that point and go, man, what am I supposed to do now? I have this idea that I'm supposed to be in charge somehow. And I think a lot of times that does result in non-equal relationships and some of these things because of some deeply taught sense of, oh, I'm the man now. I'm in charge. I'm the husband. I'm the father. I'm supposed to be doing something.
Well, and I think there's a double whammy with it because women are also taught that they need to, listen to their husband. We used to covenant in the temple to covenant with God through our husbands, and so that is also drilled in. But I think that time frame of maybe young 20s
for many people,
maybe just 20s in general,
right?
I think that's a pivotal moment because a lot of young men in that right now in society, young men in that age group are kind of floundering. There is a struggle for men right now in that age range. And I think that right now on social media, there is an uptick of these like bro guys and these manly men that want to bring back real men and real masculinity. And there's this push to get back to who we were, bring back that John Wayne ideal image of a man, and get away from emotions and connections and relationships and all of that. And so when a boy, a man, young man, whatever, is in that age range of the 20s, it really will depend who they're listening to, and because their brain might not even be fully developed yet at that point, so they will listen to different influences, and maybe they'll lean heavy into that. I will preside. I am the head of the household, and my decisions are final. Or they will lean toward more of an equal partnership and let's work on this together. And, I'm going to share my feelings with you and we're going to communicate well. And, so I do think that is a pivotal point for men. And there is a huge push to get men back into that role of power.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think usually, you just get kind of a shove on your way out. Like, okay, you got married. You're dealing with a whole new life, living with somebody. You're dealing with sexual dynamics. You're dealing with all of these things that you've never dealt with before. Okay, see you later. Let me dust off my hands and send you on your way. Instead of treating this like a real kind of rite of passage, I guess. We actually probably handle going on missions a little bit better. You have a mission prep class and all of these things, and you have a missionary training center even. Yeah. And when you get married, I mean, maybe there's temple prep if that's.
I taught a marriage prep class at BYU.
That's good.
Before I went on my mission. I didn't know what I was doing. And it wasn't teaching this sort of thing.
Right.
That manual was not about how to be equal partners with your spouse. And, it was not that.
Well, and a great comment on this in the chat. Luckily, we don't have to further this madness. We can teach our sons balance in the home.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Amen. And
again, as parents of 4 boys, man, we're trying to figure this out, and trying to figure out what to teach our boys and how to teach them. They're not marriage age yet. They're not at that inflection point yet in their lives, but they will get there.
Well, and they are getting into teenagers, and so they are at an inflection point. It's a different one, but They are at a really big time of making choices and decisions. I was actually just driving our 16-year-old home from band right before this, and I was talking to him about this and how he feels that society is encouraging him and his friends to either have emotions or not, or to, I was asking him if people in his grade or at his school get teased for doing things that maybe we typically say are for the other gender to do. And he's like, it comes up every once in a while, but that's not something that I witnessed that much. And I was kind of talking through some of the stuff that we've tried to do as parents. We were talking about toys that we had growing up, and I said, we didn't have dolls for our boys, unfortunately. That wasn't something that we did, but we did have a kitchen set.
We did.
We had a kitchen, and I said, and that's typically a girl's toy. And he said, really? There's a lot layered into that. If that's true, like he had never realized, because you are in the kitchen all the time. You bake, you cook, you do dinner with me. You know, we are both always in the kitchen, and it has never been gendered for cooking. And he was shocked to realize that was a girl's toy.
Quote, unquote, yeah.
I want to just make the quick point that there are so many things that we have in society that we say are more male or are female traits, attributes, whatever it is. When you kind of mentioned this earlier, when most often those traits are just human.
Yeah.
It is a human characteristic to be kind, to be compassionate. And unfortunately, we put that more on women, as women do this better. They're the nurturers, they care for people. It is completely possible for men to be nurturers and to care and to be compassionate. It is perfectly natural for women to be leaders.
Yes.
And we say that men they're born to lead, that's something in their DNA. You know, that is a falsehood that is taught. And, you know, it's personal to each person. Maybe I don't have certain characteristics, or you don't, that, you know, would go one way or the other. But I just want to make sure we realize these are human characteristics, and we have put a gendered construct on them to be one or the other, and we need to get rid of that.
Yep, that's absolutely a social construct. And like you talked about earlier, it wasn't that long ago, let's say within the last century, that this concept of a husband who goes to work and a wife who stays at home developed. That's actually a very recent piece, because before that, we're talking about much more pastoral and agricultural societies where everybody worked.
Yeah.
And so it was for one thing, there wasn't men going to work. Work was the fields that were around your house or whatever that was. And so this concept, which we get kind of taught is some kind of like vaguely eternal principle. Oh, men are supposed to be the providers and women are supposed to be the nurturers. That's a relatively new concept socially within even just the last 100 years.
Yeah. Even, what is that, 60, 70 years? Like, it's probably even closer if we get to the Leave It to Beaver, you know, where that was really nailed in.
As a post-World War II construct. Yeah. I think that's probably right.
Yep. Well, we've gone kind of long tonight.
We did. And we have so much more to say.
Yeah.
But we'll end it right there. Thanks for joining us. This was a really good conversation, and really appreciate everybody who contributed in the chat.
Yep. And I think that we will come back to this topic because there is a lot more to say. And I personally really like hearing my husband be vulnerable and talk about things that he's experiencing. I think it's important that we give men a platform to do that, to be vulnerable and share emotions, because you don't have opportunities to do that as much. And that is when we can realize that there are men that are working on this and are trying to process emotions and be better than they were taught. I think that we need to shine a light on that so that more men will be inspired to do that. So thanks for opening up tonight.
You bet. Go share this with a man in your life.
Or two.
Right. All right. Thanks, everybody.
See you later.
We'll see you.